Welcome everyone to this new episode of the Privacy Rules Privacyespresso series, a series where we delve into the latest news on privacy, data protection, and cybersecurity from all over the world, together with our experts from the Privacy Rules Alliance. And today with me, I have Nicole Fortunato from the Portuguese firm MLGTS, which is the exclusive member of the Privacy Rules Alliance locally. And we are going to discuss about a framework that is pretty well known in the EU and also pretty complex, which is the DORA. So first of all, Nicole, thanks a lot for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Nicole, I've seen that you with your team have worked on some FAQs related to DORA, which is always a very useful piece to look at, and that I invite all our listeners to read. Today with you, what I would like to do is going a bit more into the practical side of your experience as an expert in the field dealing with this framework, and in particular, I would like to ask you about the key mistakes that you have been witnessing in your experience dealing with it. So can you just, first of all, in a nutshell, give us an idea of which you would frame as the first 3-4 key mistakes that you have been witnessing in your experience?
Okay, yeah, of course, Alexandra. So thanks for asking. I would say probably the first key mistake that financial entities have been doing is actually about the definition of an ICT service. So we follow and advise large financial institutions here in Portugal. And at the beginning, there was a misconfusing with the outsourcing definition that we have on the EBA outsourcing guidelines. And we had a lot of supervisory authorities actually saying that DORA has a much broader scope than you had on the EBA guidelines on outsourcing arrangements, which means much more services will be covered by the scope of DORA. So this, I think, it would be one of the key aspects that I would warn our customers to pay attention to, is actually don't try to qualify your DORA contracts according to whatever you have qualified as an outsourcing arrangement, because you may have ICT services that are not outsourcing services, but they are within the scope of DORA. So this, I think, it would be the first one. As the second one, I think that all the requirements about the location that we have in Article 30 is actually something that I think we should have a double check, because we are a bit biased by the GDPR concerns, which is mostly about the hosting of data, the data in transit, where you have the data. But the truth is that the location requirements you have on DORA, they of course they are concerned about data, personal data and non-personal data, and we will get there to the third key mistake. But the main concern from DORA is also to ensure that financial supervisory authorities are able to monitor these ICT services. So the headquarters of this ICT service provider is actually something that we should be aware of, not only the location of the data, but also the location of the ICT provider, and also from their parent company, which is actually something that is referred in one of the regulatory technical standards, yet to be converted into a European delegated regulation, but the location of the parent company could also be a concern. And as the third key mistake, I would say that we have to be careful also about the concept, the definition of DORA, of data according to DORA. And actually, because we are here in a privacy forum, this is actually something that we need to be very cautious, because while GDPR focuses only on personal data, DORA extends the scope, and the concern and the definition of data is including both personal and non-personal data. So when we have that requirement of having rules about the authenticity, integrity, security of data, we cannot only say that the DPA is already governing that, because the DPA is usually only focusing on personal data. So we need during the contract remediation that we are building according to DORA, either we add technical and organizational measures to address non-personal data in this DORA addendum, or this is actually my favorite option, we would have to direct the governing of that non-personal data to the DPA and say explicitly that whatever is decided for personal data will also be applicable to non-personal data.
Okay, I have an immediate question in this last point, because it might sound like a restriction to the use of non-personal data. Did you face that as a limit, but you say that that's your preferred approach? So can you delve a bit more into these points?
Yes, it's actually because I worked as an in-house in the past, and I know how challenging it could be for you to delve with all the regulatory requirements that you have now in the European Union. You have the EBA guidelines on outsourcing arrangements. Now you have DORA. You will have needs soon, at least for the member states that already transposed them, which actually was not yet the case of Portugal, but it will happen soon. And then you have GDPR. There's a lot in your plate to handle. And that is why I usually try to simplify things as much as possible. So if the technical and organizational measures that were decided under the DPA are more or less applicable to non-personal data as well, of course, that some adjustments could be required because cryptography probably makes less sense to non-personal data, but we could make some adjustments, but it gets simpler if you just direct the governing of that non-personal data to what you already have agreed with the other party, rather than having, another layer of security measures that I think it will overcomplicate unnecessarily.
Thanks a lot. And this brings, to one of the other key points whenever we deal with those type of frameworks. You said so. In the EU in particular, but in general, there are many other frameworks that sometimes cover the same things, sometimes looks like covering the same thing, but not really are dealing with the same, which connects me a bit with your second point, that was the one on the requirements on location. You were saying that there is indeed confusion between DORA as well as GDPR requirements. How do you address that, also considering that there might be other frameworks in other parts that have similar requirements that might be confused? So how to avoid confusion in these cases?
Well, Alessandro, I think that one is very easy. When you are preparing your DORA addendum, if you are preparing one on your side, I would say that when you speak about location, I would have a paragraph defining the location of the ICT third-party service provider, and another paragraph to define the hosting location of all data, personal and non-personal data. So, separating both, I think it's enough for you to have a notion on where the service or from where the services are being provided. But another very important point there is actually because of this regulatory concern of DORA to ensure that the financial supervisory authorities will have the means to audit a critical ICT provider, it is very important that you do not allow the free movement of that ICT provider to any jurisdiction in the world. Because if an EU provider moves to, Singapore, their financial services provider will be different from an EU supervisory authority. And that, of course, could constrain the capabilities for EU supervisories to audit and to monitor the services provided by that ICT provider. So that's the type of concern, not only about the protection of data, the location of data, it's also about allowing authorities to be capable to audit.
That's exactly the reason why legal experts should be involved as soon as possible, meaning that if you make those type of mistakes in the first phase, then you might have to deal with a lot of more workload to recover to a small mistake that was made at the very beginning. Did you have any experience of this kind also on other matters other than I suspect yes. I mean, we were speaking, for example, with other members on other framework like the NIS2, and one of the key points was indeed, even if you do the right job with your cybersecurity and IT providers, sometimes the way in which the final report is structured or the documentation is made is not good for the authority or for the requirements. So
you are very right, Alexander. And in the first point, we were discussing about the definition of ICT service. If you don't have a strong legal team supporting you in defining whatever digital service means, you could have misunderstandings about what is the scope of DORA. So the involvement of the legal team by default and from the beginning is actually something that I think you need a task force. For DORA issues, I think you need a task force. You need the IT team, the compliance team, the risk team, and you need the legal team because EU regulation is getting so complex that if you don't have anyone with a well-trained eye to deep dive in these regulations, you could end up misunderstanding some important information for you.
Yeah, you've been sharing some of those cases with us, and thanks a lot for that. But of course, there are many little mistakes that can be done in the course of action. So I would like to ask you on, out of this conversation, as an expert working with DORA, but surely also with many other of those frameworks, which are the key three takeaways that should be the company approach whenever dealing with any of those framework, not just necessarily with DORA? What should they do on a step-by-step?
First of all, in any contract remediation or negotiation, and I do a lot of negotiation. That's actually 80% of my time, and I noticed that sometimes you put your legal team in bad sheets if you close too much the price at the beginning. I know that sometimes this is necessary and you agree into certain commercial conditions that benefit your company and then you move to legal. But you have a good example now with DORA that sometimes the compliance with DORA requires the payment of costs, and we will pay for the audits, for the trainings, for all that, those type of tasks that emerge from the regulatory requirements of DORA. So even though you have a more or less close price, I think you should be open to some flexibility on that, because then you could have extra costs that you would like to either accommodate in your price or just negotiate them separately. But, keep some flexibility here.
Yeah.
But we already spoke about what would be my biggest takeaway. It is create a task force. I know sometimes it's very difficult for each team to work together with other teams, like the marketing team, the sponsor of the agreement, the IT team. Since very young age, we are used to, divide our friends, those that like maths from those that like the languages and other humanistic sciences. But at some point, we need to gather all in the same table to find the best outcome for the company. So creating a task force, regardless if for DORA or for NIS2, I think it is very, very important that teams start to effectively work together in this type of topics.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, that's also our experience from the privacy rules side. Whenever we coordinate activities like these, indeed, the first step is always to create even a small team with 2-3 experts having a very deep experience into the three key sector we identified were mainly crisis communication, cybersecurity, and legal expert for the compliance side, and putting them together to work in order to streamline since the very beginning also the most efficient approach, because sometimes might look as an expensive approach having more people involved, but in the long run, most of the cases what happens is that these would limit the cases of unexpected outcomes that then you have to resolve, meaning that you already have, you're covering the type of expertise you need since the very beginning. So normally these limit the case in which we have to go back. Of course, as you were saying, one of the key elements is that whenever we deal with technologies, nothing is 100% sure, nothing is 100% covered when we speak about cybersecurity as well. So of course, there are some degrees of flexibility that everyone needs to apply. But limiting the risks of making mistakes is surely the best approach to do that, and the one you were indicating is definitely the way to go. I would like to thank you very much for this quick chat together. Was a pleasure. I very much look forward to discuss with you more and more in the future. And I thanks all our listeners because we are running out of our time. So thanks a lot for being with us today. Looking forward to the next Espresso next week.